Duane is a cultural astronomer in the ASTRO-3D Centre of Excellence and the School of Physics at the University of Melbourne. His work specialises in the intersection of astronomy with culture, heritage, history and society. He earned graduate degrees in astrophysics and the social sciences and is leading initiatives in Indigenous astronomy and dark sky studies. Thanks a lot, Duane.
Thanks, Michael Sean. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to come present today. I'm sitting here on Bunurong country over in the inner west, so I'd like to acknowledge where I am and to pay respects to elders past and present. And it's always great to hear from everybody here, especially great to hear from Auntie Carolyn. About 13 years ago, I began working in this space on Indigenous astronomy, and it's been a pretty tremendous journey since then. It's been a lot of learning experiences for someone like me, an American trained in physics who's come over to Australia and immersed themselves into a world very foreign to me. But I've been working primarily with communities on the East Coast, and in particular in the Torres Strait, where I began working about 2013 under the guidance of Professor Martin Nakata. And the initial project was to go work for the elders up on the island of Mare Island, to document traditional star knowledge, guided by the elders, of course, by the communities and their desires, and to find a range of applications that were guided by the community. And it's been quite an interesting journey over that time, because we've found a lot of fantastic applications and outcomes with this. Some things the community was expecting and some things they weren't expecting, but were very happy with. Most of the work that I do, because I'm such an outsider to so much of this world of Indigenous knowledges, my role in all of this has been to help document the star knowledge. And it's very useful to have a background in astronomy and astrophysics. And part of that incorporates working with communities where the star knowledge has been fragmented quite significantly, and it involves working with all the different sources of information to try to reconstruct as best we can what that knowledge was once like pre-invasion. Of course, we're never going to completely get there, but we do as much as we can, and we are as rigorous as possible. That's a process that, of course, is guided and directed in constant collaboration with the communities. In places like the Torres Strait, the star knowledge is still very strong. And the elders do say that less of it is being passed down, because one thing is the schools on most of the islands only go to about year 6. So when the students leave the island to finish high school, go to uni, get a job, there aren't always a lot of economic benefits to coming back. And when youth don't come back to the island, they're not quite learning the same amount of knowledge as they were before. That's also tied in with the language. So the elders with me on Mare really wanted to find ways that we could document the star knowledge and generate that into educational curricula and outcomes for the students, but also for the people around the world, because they wanted this knowledge to be shared on a global scale. And in particular, my focus has been on looking at the scientific information within this. So as we all know, Indigenous knowledge contains quite a significant layer of science, and that is something that is not generally recognized in the public or even academia. And that's been one of my main focus areas. There's so many ways we could go about doing that, but I utilize my particular background in astronomy to try to fill in that specific gap. And of the outcomes that we've been working on with the elders, one that will be coming out early next year is a new trade book on Indigenous astronomy, the science of Indigenous astronomy, that'll be co-authored with 6 elders and knowledge holders. And this focuses not entirely on the Torres Strait, although the Torres Strait is quite heavily involved in the content, but it is on a global scale. And I've worked with some elders and knowledge holders around the world on that. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about today was, what is some of this science behind it, and what are some of the outcomes that we've produced from it? Well, when we talk about science or scientists, we have to talk about, well, what's an astronomer? What is astronomy? And at its core foundation, science is about understanding the world around us. It can be done through observation and deduction, experimentation, direct application. All of these things give science its very foundations. And when it comes to astronomy, that's understanding everything that's in the sky. But as every elder that I've ever learned from has said, every single one, everything on the land is reflected in the sky. The sky serves as a map, as a law book, as a textbook, as everything. It's all encompassing. So when we're looking at this idea of, well, what is an astronomer? That's kind of a narrow way of thinking of it in the Western framework. But there are the roles of astronomers, the people who study the stars, the people whose job within a community or society it is to observe all the changes in the positions and properties of the stars. And this is something that the elders refer to as reading the stars. And in the Torres Strait there, and as well as many other parts of the world, there are traditional astronomers. In the Western Torres Strait, this person is called Zugabo Mabaig. Zugabo refers to a star person. It'll be something I'll talk about in a minute. And Mabaig means man or person. So quite literally, it means star man or star person. And this person, when they were educated in the Quad, which is sort of like a university, for a period of 7 years, they were taught all the traditional and sacred knowledge about the movements of all the celestial bodies, but not just the movements of the celestial bodies, but what that can tell you, what the direct applications are for that, and how it relates to everything on the land, because the two cannot be separated. So the positions of the stars and their changing positions throughout the year inform the people about changing seasons, about the behaviors of plants and animals, weather and climate. And there's a whole range of different time scales that this is measured and observed from. And these time scales go on a whole range. It's like a giant Venn diagram. And it's finding those crossover points that are going to give you the information you need. So this artwork is from David Boson, whose father was a Zugabo Mabaig, and he is one of the champions of the lino cut print design, which is what you see here, along with a few others like Tommy Powell and Glenn Mackey and Brian Robinson. They really pioneered this sort of newer form of art. And in here, the Zugabo Mabaig, this particular one that he's speaking about is commanding two particular groups of stars that he's directly socially connected to. And the information that's passed on is done so through the warp. And that's the hourglass-shaped drum you see just behind him. So it's that's passing on of knowledge through song and through dance and through oral tradition that keeps this knowledge, this very ancient knowledge, living and thriving today. So we can look at some of the larger ideas about the knowledge itself. And these motifs, these ideas are very widespread across the straits. The story of Tagai is one of the most common, and it's one of the most important that informs the traditional laws and practices of people in the straits. And the base story of that was that Tagai was a spiritual being, a very powerful, fierce warrior, fisherman, you name it, they did it. He commanded a crew of men called the Zugabos. That's more the Western Islands. In the Eastern Islands, they didn't have a specific name for them as a collective. And his first mate, Kareg. And versions of the tradition talk about them going on a large expedition and not having much success. So while Tagai went onto a reef to find a better spot that they could fish and hunt, the crew consumed all of the rations against the advice of Kareg and Tagai. When Tagai returned, he found out. He killed the 12 crew members into two groups of 6, saving Kareg. Kareg was variously described as his brother, his first mate. And they all ascended into the sky, and it's their positions and orientation in the sky throughout the year that dictate and inform the changing of seasons, the changing of the behaviors of the plants and the animals, whether it's fishing, hunting, agriculture, whatever it happens to be. All of that knowledge is guided by the stars of Tagai. On this particular motif here, you can see the left hand of Tagai. I realize not many of you may know a lot about astronomy, but that left hand of his on the bottom center is the Southern Cross. And his right hand is Corvus the Crow, the Western constellation Corvus. And the stars in the sky represent the different parts of his body. And he's standing on the canoe, which is traced up by the stars in Scorpius. And Kareg, his first mate, is the star Antares. Now, Tagai placed the crew, which he calls Usium and Seg, on the opposite side of the sky. They're in Orion's belt and scabbard and the stars of the Pleiades. So they're on polar opposite sides of the sky, which is interesting because you find similarities in narratives from different cultures around the world. And this is one that is pretty widespread. In ancient Greece, it was Orion and the Scorpion battling each other and the gods putting them on opposite sides of the sky to keep them away from each other. So you can see that, that Tagai is something that, well, I'm sorry, this motif is actually the logo for the Tagai State College, which is the school system across the Torres Strait. So the changing positions of these stars inform people on everything that's happening in the world around them. And how we're working on sharing that publicly now is developing that into curriculum, to planetarium and observatory programs, into museum programs. And we're doing this in collaboration with the elders through the traditional knowledge and in collaboration with the artists who are putting this literally onto canvas. It's bringing the world of the tangible and the intangible together. So here's a series of artworks that were put together by Robert Tommy Powell, who is a Marian man from Irib. And a lot of his artworks focus on these different aspects of calendars and knowledge that are tied to specific stars, but all of these star groups, they all link together. So this here is one of the Seg and how Tagai is bringing them across the sky. And there's so many layers to it, we can't go into all of that. But it does show how everything is interconnected. And then we look at the Usium, who were skewered and placed in the sky as the star cluster called the Pleiades. So what we've done with some of these outcomes in the ways we conceptualize the knowledge that's been shared by the elders is we've guided some planetarium programs. So at the Brisbane Planetarium, there's a 13-meter by 1.5-meter permanent exhibition called Skylore. And that features knowledge from Miriam on Mare, mostly through Uncle Ilo Topham, through Uwalyi, through Uncle Gillar Michael Anderson, and through Waterman, through Uncle Bill Edom Maharney. And each of these feature different elements of traditional astronomy. And when I say astronomy, I'm really referring to the science of it, as opposed to star knowledge, which can be thought of in a more broad context. But it does really focus on the astronomy. It shows how different properties of the stars changing over time, or positions of those stars changing over time, can be utilized to understand the atmospheric conditions, the seasonal changing of climates and trade winds and ocean currents. And this is really important because it is a way to get the people in the public to understand and directly see how this knowledge has so many layers of science encoded within it. And when we look at this intersection between Western astronomy and Indigenous astronomy, in this case, the Torres Strait, it's a great anchor point because astronomy is arguably probably the most popular of all the sciences. It's one of the most, it gets people really awe-inspired. And it's one that has a tremendous amount of prestige associated with it. So when you bring in Indigenous knowledge and you tie it to astronomy, it has that benefit. And it explains one of the reasons why Indigenous astronomy is so absolutely wildly popular within the public, and why so many people are able to connect with this in a way that people can obviously connect with all the other sciences with traditional knowledge, but this is one that seems to have a really deep, profound impact, in some ways, even more than the other areas of science. That's not meant to disparage any of them, of course, because they're all integrated, they're all part of it. When we talk about physics, physics is very much a part of this. And I know there have been academics and scholars and political pundits who have chastised the idea of Aboriginal physics, or Aboriginal astronomy, or Aboriginal mathematics, or Aboriginal name a science. And it comes from a deep level of misunderstanding about what those knowledge systems are and how they link together and how they tie in that knowledge. And the work that we're doing that's guided by the elders is a great way to demonstrate that and to share that with the public. It's also really important because it challenges the history and philosophy of science. And what I mean by that is the history of science and the philosophy of science obviously are very heavily dominated by Western discourse. And many of the attributions, don't know what just happened there. Many of the attributions of Western science discoveries are actually made by indigenous communities long before. So discussing the science behind them shows how the observations of variable stars or the synodic period of Venus or other astrophysical phenomena and ideas actually go back much further. They actually go back to before Western science knew about them. So this creates a larger narrative that is changing public perception about how we understand indigenous knowledges, at least with respect to science. And that's something that no doubt our ongoing work is going to continue challenging. And like anything else, when you challenge something, it's going to get a lot of pushback, but that's part of the exciting aspect of it is you're not going to change minds in the public without that sort of discourse. So we've been working particularly with Professor Marcia Langton over the years to develop the national curriculum. We've included Indigenous knowledge in commemorative coins. I know just about to go over time, so I'm just going to rush through a couple things and pass that up. One of them is based on the shark, which are the stars of the Big Dipper. What I know is the Big Dipper, being from North America. We had a series of commemorative coins released by the Royal Australian Mint. One on the emu in the sky from Wiradjuri country, one from the Pleiades in Yamaji Wajari country, and one of Bezom, which is the shark in the Eastern Torres Strait. This coin was one of the fastest selling coins in the Mint's history. This was also done by Uncle Cigar Passy. The coin completely sold out in less than 2 hours. So it was a pretty tremendous feat and one that Uncle Cigar has been very pleased with. And some of the other expectations or outcomes of this that the elders didn't quite expect were asteroid names, for example. We had a few asteroids named after Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander academics, elders, and even the entire Meriam community. So that's something that we've been able to work with the elders on doing. And I was told that when I had some certificates printed, framed, and shipped up to Mer, that the community held a very special ceremony, and that Uncle Cigar was very, very chuffed, as they say, to receive his asteroid name, which got a lot of media press. So this public perception, these public links, this public visibility and optics of Indigenous astronomy is one that is having a very substantial positive benefit and outcome, as well as the other outcomes of curriculum, calendars, educational tools, and even, documentaries with filmmakers like Werner Herzog, which we had here. I think I'm probably just about to go over time. If I've got a minute, I'd like to show this little clip, but if I don't, I'm fine with that and we can move on.
Go for it, Matt.
Okay, great. So what this is a couple of years ago, we filmed a clip for a Werner Herzog film on meteors and asteroids called Fireball, Messengers from Darker Worlds. The film starts off in Gondomala, Wolf Creek Crater in Western Australia, and it ends with the Mayer, the shooting star dance here in the Torres Strait. What you're seeing on here is the first time these dancers have ever done the dance. They only learned it the afternoon that we were filming it. Uncle Allo taught them this dance. And even though this dance comes from Mer, it's the first time it had been performed on the island in 50 years. So these are some behind the scenes images of it. Fast forward a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it there, but a very, very quick recap is a Maiar is a very, very bright shooting star, a very bright meteor, what astronomers call a fireball. And this is the soul of someone who has passed away, going to beg the land of the dead or returning home. And all the different properties of that fireball, of that Maiar, tell you different things about that person and about their journey. So it was a great way to end the film. So if you get an opportunity, it's called Fireball, Messages from Darker Worlds by Clive Oppenheimer and Werner Herzog, and it is the scene that wraps the film up. So thank you very much for having me on today.
Thanks a lot, Duane. It's really, really powerful stuff. We are pushing a bit over time, so we'll move on without questions. Your reflection, though, on the seriousness with which Western science or the public take star knowledge, particularly Indigenous star knowledge, really echoes some of the sentiments of the Western knowledge system's push to decouple scientific endeavours from culture, which I think really robs and erodes a lot of the meaning and significance of the things that we do. So it's a really nice illustration there. Thank you very much.